Welcome to Beyond Movement Project. My name is Matthew Philly, husband, father, entrepreneur, and it's my mission to bring you people who are doing incredible things that will help you reach your next level. Join me as I look beyond movement to discover how we can become the most powerful version of ourselves. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome to Beyond Movement Project. Today's guest is a veteran ultramarathon runner with an epic resume of achievements. He's ran 4 500-kilometer races, was on the U.S. National 24-hour run team, countless last man standing races, including one that had him on a treadmill in his basement for more than 40 hours, and has recently qualified for the infamous Barkley Marathon. Passionate about leading his life with purpose, he is the founder of both Run for Water and 84 Days, which are not-for-profit projects that raise awareness and provide solutions for the worldwide water crisis and provide young women of poverty with feminine hygiene education and the opportunity to stay in school. In this episode, we cover topics on building mental fortitude, pushing out of your comfort zone, and what it takes to go a distance that you never thought possible. This is episode 2 with Greg Armstrong. Greg Armstrong, my man, welcome to the Beyond Movement Project. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking your time, man. I really appreciate you coming in and chatting with me today. This is going to be a good one. Yeah,
of course. Glad to be here.
So this weekend, I saw you do something pretty incredible. And when I saw this, I had to reach out immediately. As soon as I got the information of who you were and what you do, I had to reach out and get you on the show. So I'm super stoked to have the opportunity to chat with you today.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what I saw you go through this weekend, because that's one of the big things as to why I reached out and why I started researching you. So I saw you on Jesse Itzler's Instagram page, and they had all done, Jesse, Mark Brown, Chad Wright had gone to the Mid-State Mile, and you happened to be there that same day. And this is kind of where I want to lead into. So maybe you can explain what the Mid-State Mile is and kind of give us your explanation as to what the experience was like for you.
Sure. The Mid-State Mile is an ultra marathon. There's a lot of different types of ultra marathons. Technically, an ultra marathon is anything longer than a marathon. Most people feel like, the 100-mile race is another kind of barrier in the ultra marathon. So, that going past that is another level, you might say. And I've been participating in ultra marathons for about 13 years now. So there's a lot of different formats. You've got trail races, you've got road races, you've got timed events where, I kind of specialized in that for so many years, where you have a mile circuit and you run as many laps as you can in 24 hours. And that's the race. It's not dependent upon distance. It's dependent upon time. The Mid-State Mile is kind of a relatively new concept that was established. Lazarus Lake, the originator of Barkley marathons, and some people may have seen that documentary before. It got pretty popular. He came up with this concept of the backyard last man standing type of event, and the actual world championship takes place in his backyard in rural Tennessee in late October. And that format, the traditional backyard format, is you run 4.16 miles per hour. So it could be, and generally it's not necessarily a challenging course. Like in his backyard, he has a 4.1 mile section that you do on this little trail that goes into his woods. And then you'll do that during the daytime, and then at night you do a 4.16 mile loop on the road. And the idea is you have an hour to finish 4.16 miles. You can do it fast. You could do that in 30 minutes if you wanted to and take a 30-minute break. You could do it slow and do it in 55 minutes and take a 5-minute break. It doesn't matter. but on the top of every hour, you start all over again. And so the idea is if you don't answer the bell, so that's how they call it, he rings a bell with a minute to go, you have to get in the corral. If you're not in the corral at the top of the hour, you're out. Or if you can't make it back to the corral in an hour, then you're out. And it just goes on and on until you have the last man or the last woman standing. And it's a phenomenal concept. It's completely, and obviously, it's just a different concept of an ultra marathon than your typical 100-mile race. It's a point to point,
right,
or even the timed events. And what's, I guess, a side note, what is really fascinating about some of the longer marathons, I'll throw this little plug out, we can dissect it later, is we're beginning to see there's virtually little, if any, difference between the performance of males and females. Last year, one of my good friends, Maggie Guterall, she won outright the world championship. She beat everybody. And he has, and Laz, his races, there's no distinction between male and female because he knows that in that format, there's different theories of why that is. Maybe women have a greater pain tolerance on a long-term scale or whatever it may be. That's up for debate, but whatever it is, it's just a really interesting concept. So that's the backyard concept. Now, Becca Jones, she was the race director of Mid-State Mile. She took that concept and kind of tweaked it a little bit. In her backyard, she has these, you hear about the rolling hills of Tennessee. She has these huge hills. I mean, it's crazy. It's a 19 to 20% grade. If you can think about, some treadmills will go up to a 15% grade. If anybody's ever run on a treadmill, most of them only go up to a 12% grade. But if you think about a 19% grade, so it's a 1 mile loop, the Mid-State Mile, it's called the Murder Mile, a 1 mile loop, but in that 1 mile, you climb 2 huge hills and you will accumulate over around 350 feet of ascent and 350 feet of descent. So if you do the math on that, you have 20 minutes to complete the lap. So it's just 1 mile. It's not like the 4.16
right,
on the traditional. And people may want to ask, well, why the 4.16? It's 4.16 because in 24 hours, you will have done 100 miles. Okay. That's why the 4.16. So in 48 hours, you do 200 miles. In 72 hours, you'll do 300 miles. And on a side note, that's the next barrier for the traditional backyard. I think my friend Johan Steen from Sweden, we've had some really epic battles in another race that we can talk about later. It's a 314-mile race. He has the record for the backyard event with, I'm going to be a little off, I think. I know it's around, I think it's 259 miles. So you're looking at somewhere around 59 hours, something like that. So that's where that race is, that it goes that long. And they're expecting this year, because they have last year's event conflicted with the 24-hour world championship. So a lot of big name runners like Johan and different runners weren't able to be there. This year's going to be epic. Anyhow, getting back to the Murder Mile. So this was completely different. It's only 1 mile and it's only 20 minutes. So a lot of people read that. They're like, oh, that's easy. Who can't run a mile in 20 minutes? And then they didn't read the fine print that, well, within that mile, you have to climb 350 feet of elevation. So in every 20 minutes, same format, it starts over again. And I knew after, with my, I guess, experience in doing a lot of trail races and a lot of really difficult, I knew that 20 minutes that's going to be tough at some point. It's going to be easy at first, but at some point, just climbing those hills is going to just have cumulative effect on your muscles. And so basically, and it's a little bit more than 1,000 feet per hour. So, after 12 hours, you will have climbed 12,000 feet of elevation and descended 12,000 feet of elevation. In 24 hours, 24,000.
So how long did you end up running for? How long did you end up running for? And what was your whole experience? I was second. Chad Wright won the race outright. And,
some people, I like to tell people I'll be 47 this year. So, I lost to a 32-year-old Navy SEAL. So, I mean, it's not too bad. I'll take it, I'll take it.
Yeah.
But I lasted for 29 hours and 40 minutes. And I was proud of that because, it's always been a goal of mine to do an event where you climb Everest. So that was, if you do the math, I think it ended up being a little over 30,000 feet of ascent. So that was kind of exciting. I didn't think about that till after the fact, but to think that you took your body in a 30-hour period over 30,000 feet of climbing and 30,000 feet of descent. Mm-hmm. Chad had to do, and the race ends when the last man or last woman is standing. And so he does it, they usually do a victory lap. So he did one more lap than I did. He did, so I guess he did 30 hours and I did 29 hours and 40 minutes.
It's incredible, man. And, you were talking a lot about the fact that there's obviously a vertical incline. However, people will forget that there is a decline aspect to it as well. And you were mentioning something about, your quads feeling like they're blowing up fairly early on in this experience. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
Sure. And that's what a lot of folks don't realize. It's, if you're doing a run, a 10K run, or even a marathon, generally, a marathon, can get a cumulative effect on the downhills, but it's not the uphill that's going to be the nail in your coffin in a race. It's the downhill, and I like to think of it, your uphill puts much more of a strain on your cardiovascular system, your respiratory system, you're out of breath. And yes, it is working your calves and your hamstrings for sure, but it's the downhill that is just, that's the braking and that's the damage on the muscles. So any race that I've ever done, especially long term, and I kind of chuckled a little bit, you have a lot of these guys that are just bombing the downhills. I mean, they're just running crazy hard on the downhills the first 5 or 6 hours, and they would blow by me on the downhills. I might pass them back on the uphills, and I'm just thinking, like, oh, you don't want to sound like an expert, but I wanted to say, like, man, you're killing your quads,
How much strategy,
even myself, after, I think it was around 8 or 9 hours in, my left quad started tightening up, which is, I've climbed close to 10,000 feet, or I've descended 10,000 feet. So my left quad, and I would sit down a little bit with that. I was coming in at about 16 minutes at that point, or no, more about 17 minutes, I guess, at that point, 17 and a half minutes. Chad was really consistent with the 18-minute lap. And then I would sit down just for a second, and I could just literally see my left quad was tight, and I could feel it. It was just a lot, and so I started doing a little squat to try to loosen that muscle up, and it helped a lot. And so I changed my strategy. I was talking to Chad a little bit yesterday, and I told him, I was like, yeah, I really had your strategy from the beginning, just run real control, real conservative. But I changed that strategy to speed up a little bit so I would have time, to stretch that quad out each lap. And I guess you might say it worked, because I was able to withstand another 20 hours with that quad. But eventually, and I could tell, I knew that was going to end my race. I just was hoping, I would be the last one standing before.
That somebody else would fall first.
Right. And finally that quad just completely locked up to where it was almost non-functioning on the downhills. I was still pretty strong on the uphills, but it was, and it wasn't an injury necessarily. It was just that muscle had just stopped functioning the way I wanted it to.
Started seizing up on you. That makes a ton of sense, right? Now, relatively speaking, 9 hours into an event like this is somewhat early, right? So when you start feeling something like that, that must start kind of playing an impact on your mindset a little bit. Now, you have a ton of experience with long distance races. So obviously you have like calloused mindset towards pushing through this type of adversity. This can't be your first time experiencing something like that earlier on in a race, right? So can you explain, like, does that kind of waver your mindset at all? Obviously, you have to start focusing on other things as opposed to just pushing through now. But does it play at, like, is there any weight on the mindset when you start to feel things like this?
Sure. Early on, yeah, that it would have probably derailed me in the race. Just because when you feel pain or you feel something that is causing you significant issues. I mean, it's at 9 hours in, and then your mind is thinking, well, it's only going to get worse. A saying we like to have, a saying in the ultra world, it doesn't always get worse. Sometimes it does, but it doesn't always. And I've learned from experience that, your body is just absolutely incredible. And the way I look at it, obviously there's injuries that can take place, but sometimes your body's, your brain will send signals that, okay, this hurts. We need to stop. But if you can kind of quiet that voice, eventually the way I like to look at it is your mind will say, well, okay, well, Greg's not listening to me. He's not stopping. Well, I've got to work with him. We got to work together. And you kind of work through that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I've had a lot of, so in this race, no, it didn't bother me. I mean, and that's the thing of an ultra. That's kind of why we do these things, is because there's going to be adversity. There's going to be, if it's not one thing, it's going to be something else that you've got to face with. I mean, I face planted, not the video, but I took a hard fall in the middle of the night. I mean, a hard fall coming down one of the hills and hit my head on a rock and busted my knee and laid there for about 30 seconds. And then, how if anybody's ever taken a fall, you'd kind of do that. Okay. Is there anything broken? You kind of do that body scan, and laid there for about 30 seconds and just thinking, is this the end of the race? I popped back up and just, that my knee was hurt. But if it's not one thing, it's another. But you've got to, I guess the mental aspect of that is learning how to really push through that and to understand, I guess another aspect of it too with, ultra runners tend to be eternal optimists. And I kept telling myself, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. My wife says that I'm an idealist. I tell her I'm just an optimist, but it's that concept, and that's your only choice. I mean, you can sit there and waller in self-pity, but that's definitely not going to help you any. And so you have to just keep telling yourself, oh, it's going to get better. It'll go away. Even though, maybe realistically it probably won't, but you just have to be very optimistic. And that's that has come from many races where I wasn't. I mean, I've gone through early on, I've had a lot of races where it got in my head, this small little problem that I was having. And then I had that pity party with myself and felt sorry for myself and ended up quitting because, I wasn't strong enough mentally to push through, some of those barriers. And that's what's great about the ultra running. It's, it's obvious physically, there's so many guys out there in their 20s and in their 30s that they're so much better shape physically than I am. But a quote that a friend of mine has, an old wolf has to fight with the teeth that he has. And, the teeth that I have is that experience and that willingness to push. I think mentally I'm as strong as I've ever been, and sometimes I wish I had the physical strength of when I was 35 with the mental capability that I have now. And I could do some really amazing things, but, such is life. That's kind of how we grow.
Right. Yeah. I mean, hindsight's always kind of 2020, right?
Right.
Now, redirecting your perspective, essentially, like, as you said, internal optimism, these are huge things when it comes to overcoming adversity, as you were saying, right? Like, a lot of people, like, in terms of a last man standing type race, you look at Chad Wright. He's a Navy SEAL. He's an experienced Navy SEAL, which means he had gone through Hell Week. And I've done a little bit of research, like, don't quote me on this. I've done a very little bit of research in terms of what Hell Week looks like. And I've read a few books that, kind of break it down a little bit. And some of the challenges in Hell Week that lose the most men are the ones where they don't know how long they're going to be going for.
Yep.
So that internal optimism plays such a huge part. And the men that will generally drop out will usually have something creeping in the back of their head, like this will go on forever. Like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And then that kind of creeps up, and it's like that snowball effect. Snowball gets going, it gets bigger and bigger. And these negative thoughts have that capability as well. They get bigger and bigger and bigger until they just wear you down completely. And those positive thoughts have that same thing. I mean, you can continue to push those positive thoughts to the forefront and push those negative thoughts to the back, because we all have them and they're all there. However, they don't have to take more weight than the positive thoughts, right? So looking at people who are successful through Hell Week in terms of Navy SEALs, ultra runners, these people generally have some form of stronger positive self-talk, and that can range in many different things, like affirmations, the spoken word. That's something that Chad actually talks quite a bit about. He actually verbally speaks his positive mindsets, and he believes in that. However, everyone seems to have their own kind of style as how they like to keep that positive mindset going. Now, in something as wild as a last man standing race, when you have, various different styles of people involved, different backgrounds, different experiences, you're going to have the two last people standing. It's going to be quite the battle every single time, because those are the people who generally have the most experience with a strong mindset, and that can push through the pain when it sets on, right? So you personally, do you find that there's a vast different mindset style when it comes to the last man standing races versus something crazy challenging like the 500-kilometer races that you've done?
Yeah. No, not really. I think it's the same. And if you look at those that have been really successful at the backyard races, I was blessed to be a part of the U.S. 24-hour ultra team last year. It's a 24-hour race, and what's beautiful about that, you run for 24 hours. You can measure it in kilometers or you can measure it in miles. It doesn't matter. And so it becomes this world championship with 34 different countries. There's 400 people participating. I mentioned Johann Steen has the record in the backyard format for the most miles. In 2017, he was a silver medalist in the world for the 24-hour event. And Johan and I, and the same thing, we have battled for, I think I've completed the Vol State race, which is a 314-mile race from Missouri to Georgia in the middle of July, and the heat and humidity of rural Tennessee. We've battled in that race for 3 years in a row. So it's kind of the same mindset. Yeah. And especially when that competitive component kicks in, because both of those events, like, Johan and I, it took both of us to get the most out of ourselves in that 314-mile race. And of course, the World Championship, you get a gold medal, and there's a silver and a bronze. So you have that competitive component. So it's the same mindset that takes place. It's just a slightly different format. And I think it's important. I want everybody to know too that this isn't something that I have just mastered. I still have moments of weaknesses, and sometimes I had a really weak. I almost pulled out of this race because I've had a couple of failed ultras in the last couple of months that I lost my confidence. I didn't know if it was age or I was dialed in mentally. I just didn't think my body was ready for it. So, and ultra running is different than other sports. When you complete an ultra marathon, you win an ultra marathon. I've been blessed to win some races. It's not that I've conquered it, I'm the best. It is by the grace of God go I. I mean, it is completely this sense of humility that you were able to accomplish what you did because you went through some real moments of weakness. I mean, you think about other sports, you think about, whether it's football or basketball or whatever, they're not, they may have some adversity, but it's not these just deep moments of weakness where you're just having to draw from your inner soul to be able to push through. And you mentioned those mantras and the things that you said. And really, I think what made me successful at this race was the humility of a failure of my last backyard event. In April the 4th, they had it was the quarantine backyard. It was just an interesting format. And it ended up being an amazing event. 2,500 people from around the world. It was on a Zoom conference. So a Zoom call. The rules of the race, you could either have a course in your backyard. You could create your own 4.1 mile course, but you had to GPS it. So you had to validate it somehow through Strava or some type of GPS app, or you could run on a treadmill. And either way, you had to have a Zoom call, just like we have right now, on 24/7 on your starting corral or faced at your treadmill, right? And so it started with 2,500 people around the world. And I felt pretty confident at that point. And I told myself at the beginning, I said, I know you can go 48 hours. I know you can do that. I've run more than 200 miles in 48 hours before. I know you can do that. There's no reason physically you can't do that. And I said, and then at that point, let's see where you are and let's let the competition kick in, right? And I opted to do it in the treadmill in my basement. So I'd start the treadmill on the top of every hour. I'd run 4.16 miles. I'd get off the treadmill, and then you'd have a Zoom conference with the people that were in your group, and you could chat and you could talk for the 15, 20 minutes that were left. And then on the top of the hour, I'd get back on my treadmill. And what was neat about it, there's 5 or 6 different Zoom calls at the beginning, but as people dropped, they kept getting narrower and narrower. And then after 24 hours, you had all 30 people that were left were on one Zoom conference call. So that was kind of neat to communicate with people in Sweden and Czechoslovakia and all over the world. And it got to hour 40. I was at hour 40. There's only 4 of us left. There's 4 individuals left. And I started having those demons, those thoughts, those negative thoughts that were creeping in. And I would look over and I could see everybody else was finishing in about 40 minutes into the hour. And it was taking me like 45 minutes. And then I sat down and we would talk a little bit, and man, they seemed so strong, and I felt so weak. And then I was like, but I told myself I'd make it 48 hours. And then I get to hour 43. I finish the 43rd hour. I sit down with full intention to get back up. And then I look at the treadmill, and I'm in my basement. And at that point, it's like 3 a.m. in the morning here in Tennessee. The couch is right in front of me. I haven't slept in, 43, 45 hours. So, the sleep deprivation is starting to kick in. I'm looking at my couch. I'm looking at all these 3 other competitors that seem super strong. I found out later that they were about as weak as I was. It just got into my head that they were crazy strong. And I stepped on my treadmill with a minute before the hour. And then I looked back, and then I stepped off the treadmill and I looked at the screen. I was like, I'm out. And then I watched those other 3. There's one woman from, I think she was in Sweden. There's a guy from, I can't remember some European country, and another guy in Virginia. They started their run. And Matt, I kid you not, within 5 minutes, I was like, Greg, what have you done? Because my body was okay. I could do, I was finishing in 45 minutes. It's not like I was timing out. Oh, and the next day, the next week, I was just like, and I told myself in this mid-state, I was like, okay, I can accept if your body breaks down, but your mind is not going to quit. You are not going to quit in that chair. The only way that you are going to drop out of this race is out there on the course and not making it back in 20 minutes. And I just kept telling myself that over and over and over again. And so it almost made it kind of easy and there was times that I wanted to quit. I was tired, and, I saw Chad, and you got down to 3, and then you tell yourself, oh, that's good enough. I'm in the top 3. That's good enough. It was Father's Day. I could come home and see my family, all those voices and all the things that you're telling yourself, I just want to be done. But that I committed to myself at the beginning. So, that's the other thing that I think maybe that's the takeaway and application in a lot of different areas of life it's these things I don't think are ever just we can put on autopilot. You have to be purposeful and deliberate with what you want out of life or what you want out of business or what you're wanting to accomplish. And then, you have to make these goals, and you have to, and in that sense, it kind of made it easy for me because I told myself over and over and over again, leading up to this race, Greg, you will not quit. You're not going to quit. The only way that you're going to leave this race is if your body cannot make a loop in 20 minutes. And so either I can lie to myself or be untrue to myself, or I just go as long as I can. And so in that respect, it kind of made it easy. I didn't give myself any other option.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, you were talking about the treadmill race that you did. And then as soon as you got off, within 5 minutes, you're thinking to yourself, oh shit, like what have I done? Right? Like that's
Right.
when those negative feelings start to come in. However, near that end, you start justifying just quitting. And it makes it seem so great. And those, as you said, those are those demons coming in and kind of, it's your ego, right? Trying to protect you, trying to keep you safe, trying to get you away from that ultimate discomfort that initially you were kind of seeking, right? So those are the moments like that you as an ultra runner tend to want to push for. You want to see how much can I push through those negative thoughts, those demons that are trying to slow me down. I've heard a lot of people talking about remembering how you're going to feel tomorrow, right? Yeah. So in those moments when those demons are really coming up and they're starting to, as you said, oh, it's Father's Day, I can go be with my family. There's 3 left. That's a great accomplishment. I've already ran for 20 some hours at this point. I mean, nobody's going to care, right? Like these are the things that your mind's going to start telling you, and it's justifying just quitting. And, having that strong mindset to push through those, that's where like remembering tomorrow kind of has that effect, right? It's like, how am I going to feel tomorrow if I stop before that I knew that I could have kept going, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
That's right.
If I quit before my body breaks down, then I know it was my mind. And that's what you signed up for, was to be able to push yourself to the limit. So seeing that you went into the mid-state mile, that murder mile, as they call it, with that mindset, like you're not going to quit. And I watched the video, you fell and you had 10 seconds to get up and start your next loop. You fell and it was evident that your quads literally seized up and stopped working. Your legs were buckled and you fell on the ground with straight legs. And then they picked you up. They physically picked your body up off of the mud, gave you your walking sticks back, and you just started going again.
Yeah.
So that in itself, man, was like one of the coolest things I had ever seen. And, at the time I had no idea who you were. I was like, what is this guy doing? He's an animal, like that's so like, there's so much inspiration to be had there to be able to pick your brain from. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. Now I want to kind of go back to a couple of your other accomplishments. Now you've done, I think it's 2 500-kilometer races, 314 miles, right?
Actually, I've finished it 4 times.
4 races like that.
4. I failed once, and I've attempted the race 5 times. 2014, 2015, 2016. I set the course record aided. They have 2 categories. You can do it aided or unaided. Aided means you can have a car follow you and can give you something to drink. Unaided means that you're just at the mercy of gas stations. And this is rural Tennessee. There's some stretches that are like 30 miles that, if it's night, you have to go 30 miles between one gas station to the next. The heat index, I don't think I've ever been out there where the heat index wasn't over 100. There's a couple of days you got up to like 109 with the humidity is just crazy because you're in the Mississippi Delta where you start, and then just rural Tennessee. But yeah, I was able to complete it 4 times.
That's incredible, man. Unreal. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, from what I saw, you completed in, what was it, 2014 in 3 hours, 17, 3 days, 17 hours, sorry.
Yes. 2014. That was my first multi-day. and that's where Johann Steen, I think we exchanged leads like 20 times in that race. It was incredible. I mean, we're just back and forth, and he was doing it unaided. I was doing it aided. And yeah, I guess to talk about that for a moment, there's just this beautiful camaraderie. Like Chad and I never met Chad. I didn't know Chad before this event. But when you go through, it's different than any other. Like I used to play basketball, I played tennis, I played other sports. You know, it's easy to demonize your opponent, and you know you're not necessarily friends before, during, or after the competition. It just doesn't. You know, there's not any. But these races, and like, you know, if you know Chad, he's a pretty competitive guy too. I mean, he wanted to win. I wanted to win. I mean, you know, but it's ultra running creates this camaraderie that's just amazing. And Johann Steen, I mean, we have just a connection there, you know, and he would tell me, he's like, okay, you know, you have to promise me if I fall asleep and I'm asleep in the ditch when you pass by, because he's unaided, you know, wake me up so we can run together. And, you know, and I would do that. I would be running along and I would see kind of something reflecting in the ditch, and he'd be laying down in the ditch on the side of the road. And I couldn't bend over because I was so stiff. We were a mile 230, and I'd kick him a little bit, and he'd hop up and we'd run together for a couple of miles, and then I might pull ahead or he might pull ahead. And, but it's just, so yeah, 2014 was my first. 2015, I guess I was a little bit cocky. You know, I thought I had a really great race. I won. I actually was able to beat Johann, which was a good accomplishment. I thought, well, I can go after the course record, which the course record is held by the man that holds the 3-day ultra running record and the 6-day ultra running record, Joe Feggies, he's an incredible multi-day runner. He's probably the most successful multi-day runner in the United States ever, you might say. And so 2015 was humbling. I did not break the course record. I barely got under 4 days. I think I finished in like 3 days and 23 hours. It was a grind to get to the finish. So that was a humbling experience. 2016, I went back and I was blessed with that humility. Again, I mean, some of my best races come after a failure. You know, and I think, and it's taught me to embrace that failure. You don't like it, you don't enjoy it, but you learn so much more from, you know, maybe coming up short or failing at something than you do success. You know, I teach high school, and I'm constantly telling students, don't fear failure. Don't not attempt something because you think you might fail. 2016, I was blessed to be able to break Joe Feggies' course record. Is 3 days and 7 hours that I ran that race. And then I didn't run in 2017. 2018, I was going after the unaided record, which was held by Johann, my good friend. He had the course record for doing it unaided. So I was trying to beat his record, and I made it 125 miles, and just mentally I wasn't there. Physically it wasn't great. So called my wife. She came to pick me up off the side of the road. And at that point, I remember on the drive home, I made a 365-day commitment. That, I mean, I did other races. I even qualified for the U.S. Ultra Team, which is an amazing honor, but nothing was as important to me as going back and getting redemption on that Ball State. And it actually, the course record was just a part of the goal. It was more of, okay, you're going to be dialed in mentally and physically, and you're going to complete this thing. You're not going to just quit again. And in 2019, last year, I was blessed to break the unaided record in 3 days and 14 hours. So
incredible, man. Incredible. Now, have you always had a strong mindset, or is this something that you've just cultivated through your running experiences, or has there been other experiences in your life that you know you challenge yourself mentally as well? Because obviously with the running that you do, that in itself is going to cultivate a strong mindset over time, right? You naturally have to push yourself past your perceived limits in order to be able to run for an extended period of time like you do, right? Anything past what your body is comfortable with starts to become a bit more of a mind challenge at that point, right? And then that's when that adversity starts kicking in. So everybody has that limit. and everybody's limit is a little bit different. Have you always had a strong mindset to be able to push past these things, or is it something that you've cultivated through running, or maybe even something else?
Right. I think the majority of it, it's always maybe I have a little bit of that, I guess, innate or just in me. I was born with, but I would probably lean towards the latter. I think it's something that I've learned and I've, through experiences and through adversity. Um, and to me, I think, and I think you were exactly right. We all have, I guess different,
Thresholds almost.
Yeah, thresholds. Yeah, we all have a threshold, and that's what I love about the ultra running race. It's just, and for me, honestly, it is less about winning. I wasn't successful at winning races until maybe my mid to late 30s, because it was that long of a learning curve for me to figure out how to push myself to those limits. But before that, what I love about ultra running, and I think if you ask most people, it doesn't matter if you win or if you lose, you have the opportunity to push yourself to that absolute threshold. And if you do that, what you learn about yourself and the self-discovery is incredible. And that's the ultimate gift. It's not the gold medal, or it's not the course record. It's what you can learn about yourself by pushing yourself to that threshold. So I guess to answer your question, I think for the most part is something that I have learned, and I have learned, for me, it's a very much of a spiritual discipline to take yourself to a place that where you suffer. I mean, there's no other way to put it. That it's, I coach cross country, and I tell my kids from day one, I was like, running a 5K as hard as your body possibly can, it is painful. It hurts. I mean, and so, and sometimes if I'm helping another person in an ultra marathon, it sounds really harsh, but, as my wife is great, she gives me tough love. There's no pity. She knows that that's not going to help me accomplish my goals. If I start complaining about it hurts or something's bothering me in the ultra, my wife generally say, well, what'd you expect? Did you expect anything different? And that's the same thing. Like, people see the video. A lot of people, I think, felt sorry for me in the mid-state mile when I fell down or I looked like I was in pain. And, and my point was not to be, a smart aleck about it, but that's what I signed up for. I'm just having the time of my life. I mean, if I didn't want to suffer or experience adversity, I'd have played golf, or I would have, set out by the pool, but I signed up to suffer. And I know that sounds a little strange, but you learn and you grow when you're outside of your comfort zone. When there's adversity, that's where growth is taking place. And so I like to look at those moments that's when I'm growing as an individual. And the self-reflection and generally, and I do want to say this, I think sometimes people, I've been watching some of the 30-30, shows on the ESPN with these, and again, I have utmost respect, but, you look at a lot of athletes they want to win at all costs. And it's all about them being the absolute best. I don't really aspire to that. I always try to teach my runners, and I try to keep this at the forefront of my mind, that running is a component of my life to make me a better individual, a better father, a better employee, a better coach, a better mentor. It's not the opposite. I'm not using every aspect of my life to make me a better runner. It's not the ultimate goal. It's just an avenue in which I can become a better contributor to the world in which I live, and not just a consumer of it, if that makes sense. So I try not to just run for my own glory or for my own, accomplishments. I try to hopefully I've allowed running to make me a more humble and a more of a servant to the world in which I live, and not just someone that's trying to get all of the, glory from it.
Yeah, man, using your passions for the greater good, really. That's awesome. And I think it's so powerful when you're just talking about basically seeking adversity, seeking that struggle. And that's something that so many people really, really don't go for. Today's day and age, we all strive for comfort. Comfort seems to be the thing that everybody tries to go for. You know what I mean? And that's not where the growth really tends to happen. So I'm really happy that you brought that up and you kind of, reiterated that suffering, right? Like a lot of people say that initially sounds awful, right? Like, why would you want to suffer? And obviously you're kind of referring to in a safe aspect. You're not referring to like chopping your arm off or anything like that.
Right.
You're referring to suffering in the event of developing more internal will, internal strength, right? So that suffering in itself is literally what fortifies that strength, and that it develops more iron will, that is that unshakable mindset. And without that adversity, that actually becomes nearly impossible, right? How are you supposed to become more mentally powerful when you don't push your limits into something that you didn't think you were capable of doing previously?
Right.
So if you're happy sitting on the couch constantly, watching Netflix, that's the comfortable area for so many people. That's not where growth happens, right? Because first of all, you're just sitting there in that comfort zone and, you're relaxing, which is all fantastic. But if you never push yourself into those outer stressful limits, then that relaxing period doesn't become nearly as satisfying. There's barely any fulfillment in those relaxing moments. So think about next time, you're watching Netflix, are you doing it just because you're being lazy, or are you doing it because at this point you feel like you've earned it and now you can genuinely feel satisfaction from that relaxing? I mean, today, and like everybody tends to want to watch TV at the end of the day, and there's no satisfaction at that anymore. So when you can feel satisfaction with those moments, that's when that you're making some real growth progress.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I think that's so true. I think a lot about, there's a scripture that kind of touches on that it says we glory in our suffering because suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance is what builds character. So it's kind of like, so when you're going through something difficult or you're going through a dark valley, and it doesn't mean you're not going to like it, it's not going to feel good, but just understand that if you're strong and you have faith and you can trust and you can push through that you're going to be stronger for it. You're going to learn to and like, I think that's, you ask, I've learned to persevere. That's something that I've learned because I've enabled my body to suffer. We can look at other characters through history that have suffered. It wasn't by choice. They didn't go into an ultra marathon. We just live such a cushy life in America that in order for us to suffer, we have to sign up for a race. Whereas and I want to say this too. We lift up athletes, or people look at us and they think, oh, you have this ability. But honestly, the true athletes of the world, the people that, are the people that I've experienced, the porters on Kilimanjaro. I climbed Kilimanjaro. These men are the most incredible athletes that you will ever see. They shamed me climbing this mountain and coming down the mountain. And I felt like I'm a pretty good runner and hiker. There's incredible athletes. I'm just in awe of their physical ability to carry, 50 pounds on their head up to the top of this 19,000 foot mountain with altitude sickness. And they're wearing like Nike free tennis shoes that are worn out. They don't even have proper footwear or proper clothing, and they're not doing it like I'm doing it to get some type of, they're doing it because they have to. They're doing it out of necessity. I came across a man one day. I'll never forget this moment. I was in a rural village in Nicaragua. We do water projects. We can talk about that a little later, but I was walking past this house, and I don't speak very good Spanish. I should. I've been there a lot, but I was by myself. I didn't have my translator, and this lady, she was motioning for me to come over. And so I came over, and we kind of had some, exchanges, and I could tell she wanted to show me something. She walked me into her backyard. I looked down in a hole in the ground that was 3 feet wide in diameter, 35 feet deep, and I would say half dirt and the other half rock, solid rock. Her husband is at the bottom of this hole, 35 feet in the ground, with a chisel and like a 9-pound hammer, chiseling rock while his children take a rope and a bucket and pull the rock out. He's digging for water for his family. And what she was telling me, I went back and got the translator. She said, "Can you please help my husband? All we have to eat is salt and tortillas. And he does this every day so we can have clean water for our family." And I'm thinking, that just puts to shame any ultra marathon or amazing accomplishment that I've been able. That's the true athlete. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's the person. And, you know, and he's suffering and going through adversity, not because, you know, he's signing up for some fun race or he's going to get an award or he's going to be, you know, videoed and it go all over Instagram or, you know, anything like that. He's doing it so his family can have clean water.
He's providing for his family. Right.
And so it's weird, but I think that we, you know, as a person of faith, I would say that we were created to, that's how we grow. That's how we're designed. And, you know, and that's how is that we, you know, we grow through adversity. And I think, you know, in our culture, although it's great, we have all these comforts and all these things, like you said, just so many times we become weak mentally and we're not able to persevere and to withstand some of those hardships. And I think that prevents us from living the most abundant life that we can. And, you know, Chad and I talked about this while we're on the course. You know, we're talking about the 30 hours that we spent it. I think at that point it was like 27, 28 hours when it was down to the two of us, and how I like to create as many hours of my life that I'll remember. Right. And so one challenge I always like to issue to my students is like, you know, how many days of your life are you going to remember later on? Most of the time, you know, our lives are just pretty much a mirror of the day before. Each day is kind of the same. But when you have in moments like that, I call it life concentrated. Like I can go back and relive. I'll remember June the 20th and June 21st, 2020 for a long time, because there's a lot of growth that took place, a lot of pain that took place. There's just a lot of highs and lows that took place. I'll remember that probably till the day I die. And that's going to fulfill my life, and I can continue to learn from those experiences. Whereas I used to, you know, have a job that was a little bit mundane and you kind of just did the same thing over and over again. And then you reflect on that job after a year and I'm like, man, what's the takeaway? You know, what are the moments of this year that I can really and feel enriched from? And they were just so few and far between. So I don't know if that makes sense as far as thinking about living life concentrated where, and generally it's not the most comfortable. It's going to take place outside of our comfort zone that we're going to grow or we're going to remember the most from.
I love that, man. That's so awesome. Now I kind of want to chat with you about how you got involved in running. Is this something that you were always naturally kind of drawn to, something that when you were younger you thought or you saw that you were excelling at it, or is it just something you enjoyed? Did you have prior experiences, like your family was involved in running? How did this kind of start for you? Like, where did this passion develop from?
Sure. Well, you know, in the late 70s, early 80s, I guess kind of like, I don't know if you've seen like the Forrest Gump movie, you know, that was kind of that craze in America of just your, you know, this suburban person, you know, everybody that go out and run a couple of miles, that kind of that running craze, the late 70s, you know, the old Nike waffle shoes. My dad was kind of a part of that, you know. So I remember when I was probably 5 or 6, I would always get up early and I'd watch my dad, you know, strap on his Nike shoes and go out for his morning 2 or 3 mile jog. And I remember asking him, you know, can I go with you? No, not yet. You know, maybe one day. And then he would let me ride my bike with him through the neighborhood. And then finally, I remember the day where I was able to run, you know, with my dad. And that, so, you know, that was kind of instilled in me early on. And my dad has always taught me a strong work ethic. And, you know, he's always ingrained in me this concept of, you know, doing hard things is very fulfilling, you know, whether it's working on the farm or business. We had a family business that, and I ended up taking over that business, but he made me start at the lowest person, the lowest job, and work every single position in that business before I could take it over. And so he taught me the fulfillment of doing hard things early on. And I guess I had a little bit of talent in running, but I was never the fastest. I think I ran cross country in high school, and I almost qualified for state my senior year, but never. So I never really found like great success at running until I got into those really long distances where, and kind of my philosophy, if you take a 100-yard sprint, that's 90% genetic talent, right? It's 10% training, and the mental fortitude is really not even a component. And you just sprint and it's over. The longer the race, in my opinion, the more that mental fortitude is a significant component of the success. So that it still takes a certain amount of genetic ability. Like the race on Saturday, everybody kind of sizes up their competition. I'm looking over based on my age and my lack of genetic ability. There's 75, I'm just spitballing, but I'd say there's probably 30 or 40 individuals there that have more genetic running ability than I do, based on age and based on just what I was dealt. But when it comes to mental fortitude, and the longer the race, the more that mental fortitude is a significant component. Is that, if that makes sense? Because
you had that
like a marathon, for instance, most marathons are pretty robotic. People have it dialed in. And, my best marathon is just shade under 3 hours, which is respectable. It's decent. But you look at, a lot of these races, I'm competing with guys that are running 230, 220 marathons. But when you're in a 314-mile race, your marathon time really doesn't matter. It's about your will and your ability to push through those dark moments.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. And do you find that, the shorter runs, like, do you often run long distances in your training, or do you like to kind of keep it a little bit shorter? I know we had a conversation yesterday, and you were mentioning that you're going to keep your weeks light and keep them around 70 to 90 miles in a week. Now, somebody like myself who's been training for years specifically with a barbell and does infrequent running, that sounds wild to me. That sounds like something that I'd put in the span of 6 months, right? So do you, like, with your training, do you often keep the mileage long in one specific go, or is it, for an 80-mile week, is that 3 runs for you? Is that 6 runs? What does that look like?
Sure. And it's, the sport of ultra running, either I'm a real slow learner and it's constantly teaching you things. And and as soon as I think I've got it kind of figured out, even my own body or my training regimen or what I need to do to prepare for a race or nutrition, there'll be, you'll be surprised, and so getting ready, I think I mentioned my failure at Ball State, the 314-mile race in 2018. I felt like I knew what I needed to do to get ready for that race. So for 365 days, it was about logging just almost as many miles as my body could handle, because it's a long, slow grind. If you're running anything faster than a 10-minute mile in that 314-mile race, you're probably running too fast. So I didn't need any speed work. So 2019, my goal was to run 6,000 miles for the year. So, I think I ended up getting an injury like December, maybe 20th. I had like 2 weeks left to go. And so it's kind of ironic, but I ended up, I think, doing like 5,900 miles, maybe something like that. That's 125 miles a week. So that was a big year for me as far as mileage. But prior to that, I generally would average 100 miles a week. Would be to me that's not light, but that's probably what 100 miles a week is pretty typical for anything other than a really long multi-day race. If it's a long multi-day race, I'm going to average more. So I guess that's kind of how my training. But going back to your question, I mix it up. I think to me it's more about time on your feet. So there's days that I'll hit 125 miles in a week, and I don't have any runs longer than 20 miles. In fact, I think that's a little bit better than breaking that down in, because if I go out in one go and do a 50 or 50 mile run as a training run, it's going to require a little bit more recovery than if I do 50 miles in 2 days. Like I'm a school teacher and I have a family. So my typical schedule in that like last year, a typical schedule, get up at about 3:30, kind of have some time in meditation and journaling. I'm really big on thinking about what you want to accomplish that day. I write down sometimes to the hour what I want to accomplish at each hour throughout that day. I make a daily plan of what I want to do, very deliberate, very purposeful. Usually by 4:15, 4:30, I was out on the road. I know this may seem a little strange, but my philosophy is if you shower and clean your body before you run, even though you sweat, you don't usually accumulate a lot of body odor. So I run to school. I live about 10 miles from school where I teach, but I'll sometimes run farther. And so I have to be at school at 7:15. So I'll run right up to 7:15. I run in sandals, so I don't have to worry about, stinky socks. Sometimes I'll hose my feet off in the spigot if my feet, need to be cleaned. I've got these dry fit, zip off pants. So I'll just zip on the bottom part of my pants and take off if I'm either running without a shirt, or maybe I run with a shirt, I'll take my shirt off, let it dry, and put on my school shirt. And so I finish my run at 7:15. I walk into the classroom at 7:16. At lunch, and I may get in about 15 miles in the morning generally. At lunch, I just grab something and go and I usually get in about 3 or 4 miles in my lunch break. And then as a cross country coach, I'm able to run with my kids and kind of pace with them in the afternoon. So, I would average about 20 miles a day, but it was generally, maybe a long run in the morning and then a couple of small 4 to 5 mile runs throughout the day.
Wow. Okay, man. So I have to ask this, me being a mobility specialist, I work with a lot of different athletes to help them improve their joint strength, reduce risk of injury, and ultimately improve longevity of sport and lifestyle for that matter. I have to ask, running this much, it seems like it would break the body down so quickly. And in my experience, I've seen that it does. Obviously everybody again is very, very different. Now, do you find that this, your passion for running and the amount that you do run, has it had an impact on your joints? Has it had an impact on your range of motion? Can you tell me a little bit about that? And if you do some sort of recovery or stretching routine to kind of keep yourself able to continue moving the way you like to do?
Right. And that's a really good point. And to be honest, I really, again, I'm about running, I never want to sacrifice my overall health to be. And if you look at some of the most successful athletes in their field, not all of them, but a lot of them, whatever it is, some of them, you could argue that, a gymnast or a boxer, sometimes what they do in order to be the absolute best is not necessarily what's best for their overall health or their longevity. If that makes sense. They sacrifice that for that victory or for that immediate success. And I would be honest, there's probably times that I've kind of skirted that, and I'm constantly trying to be cognizant of that. For instance, I will never run 6,000 miles in a year again, because although I think that was part of my success at Ball State, ultimately it was not good for my overall health, if that makes sense. I also believe that your body has the ability to acclimate for what you're trying to accomplish. So I don't want to dodge the question, but um, and I know that generally, we think, I'm a firm believer that, mobility is a very important component to your overall health. But ankle flexibility and hip flexibility and those things are not necessarily all that important for a multi-day run, if that makes sense. Like it doesn't. So if all I ever wanted to do, if I didn't want to go to Africa and repair wells and to work on the farm, or to be, overall health and be able to do different things with my body, if all I ever wanted to do was be a long distance ultra runner, then, I don't know if it would be necessarily damaging to my body. I didn't have any injuries last year per se, but I just lost a lot of mobility. Like I noticed that, when I go out after, like last year, I wasn't able to go out and work on the farm or to lift things that were heavy without, feeling like I was going to strain something. But the running itself didn't necessarily injure me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%.
The point I'm trying to make though is I do believe that I need to find, I'm at that point right now this year. I'm trying to find that balance. Like currently, because of last year, I lost a lot of mobility, particularly in my hips. I've never been flexible in my hips whatsoever. Even as a kid, I remember, in the second grade, go sit Indian style on the rug. I was like, I can't do that. My hips don't function that way. My people would always make fun of me if some people will sit, like I sit down. I don't guess this is hips. This is probably more ankle and knee, but I sit down and my glutes do not even touch my heels. So I've never been, the most flexible individual. But for the last 3 months, I started doing sauna training for that 314-mile race, which is I know this sounds a little strange, but this is the way I build that mental energy. I did a race in Death Valley a couple of years ago. You run through Death Valley in July. So the start of the race was like 127 degrees. So, and that's hard on the body. So to get ready for that, I would, at least 3 or 4 days a week, I would jog in place in the sauna at 180 degrees for an hour to 2 hours. And that was physically taxing, but also mentally taxing to just jog in place for 2 hours in a sauna, just in this box of just
zero
heat.
Distraction.
Right. So, but I've transferred that, and I enjoyed benefits from that. Now, for the last month, I've focused on using that time to increase my mobility. So I'm not jogging in place. I'm spending about 30 to 45 minutes trying to do a lot more hip, hamstring, and back stretches, just because I need that in other aspects of my life. I don't necessarily think I need that in running per se. And I've tried. I went through 6 months. I did yoga for 6 months while I was training to see if that made me a better runner. It didn't hurt, but I don't know if it really helped that much. I probably have been better off to spend those 30 minutes a day running more miles than I would. And, and if you think about it, you just do the math. If you're trying to run 125 miles a week, it's a time management. It is a time management. And so, although I love cross training, at the end of the day, you have to train how you're going to fight. I mean, you've got to train with how you're going to compete, and you can't, and, running is the best thing. And, so I hope that kind of answered your question. So I'm at that point now where I'm going to probably back off the miles a little bit and try to gain back some of that mobility and some of the things maybe that I lost last year by just running so incredibly far.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, I don't think running is a sport that necessarily demands a ton of mobility, right? It doesn't really demand a ton of ranges of motion from your joints. The most would be your ankles, of course. So stability in the ankles would be something that's more important than range of motion per se, just to help protect that joint and make sure that it's not being worn down over the time of that impact on the pavement, right? now at this point, it seems like you're, as you said, you're more focused on, overall health and wellness of your body at this point, and not necessarily to improve your run. So yeah, I think, hips and would be, a really good place to start at this point. When you're running, and running as a sport doesn't require much mobility in general, right? When you're running, it's all in one plane of movement. However, everyday life does not happen in that one plane, right? Like you're
Right,
rotating,
exactly.
you're bending. You got to make sure that your body's capable to adapt to the specific demands that you're placing on it. And you, as somebody who works on a farm, you put a ton of demand on your body and in many different planes of movement. And, I've worked with some farmers in the past, and I feel like their lifestyle with, what they do for work and, whatever else they possibly do. And in your situation, it's running on top of that. Your body needs to be healthy and well-rounded, right? Not just good at running, right? So like, it's interesting to see that, you're starting to see somewhat of things slowly breaking down as your mobility breaks down in your everyday life.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, man, I have one final question for you, and I ask this to all my guests. What do you think? Now, you've had a ton of experience with adversity, and reaching your goals, obviously, over the many years of being a runner. Now, I want to know what you think separates, and what is the number one thing that separates high performers from people who don't reach their goals.
If I had to sum it up, if I had to narrow it down to one thing, I think maybe I'll start with the second component, and then I'll kind of get to what I think is most important. I think, and maybe it all kind of wraps up together. I think it's very important that individuals live a purposeful and a deliberate life. That's something that I'm constantly trying to do more of. I tell my students that you be the captain of your own ship. I never like to use the excuse of, I don't have time for that, or I have to do this. I tell my students there's very few things that you absolutely have to do if you really think about it. Now I know we frame that, or I have to do this, but you're just saying you don't like the consequences, right? Especially for those of us that are adults. There's really nothing that you have to do that's absolutely mandatory. I mean, you can kind of break that down, but and the point that I'm trying to make is it's liberating to know that everything you do in life is your choice. And so you have to be the captain of your ship, and you have to be deliberate and purposeful with what you decide with each day that you're going to do. And don't trap yourself into that box. But I think what separates individuals that are successful at getting through, I think it's learning how to manage the unexpected adversity, right? So a lot of times I see a lot of individuals that are driven. I won't mention names, but there were some guys on the course that were like, this guy's he can win. He's put in the training. He's focused, he's dialed in. But then what I saw, and he knew that there was going to be some problems. He knew that there was going to be some things that would come up, but something hit him that he wasn't expecting, and he didn't know how to handle the unexpected. That's what I love about ultra marathons, because I started that race, and yeah, there's some things that I knew were going to be challenging. It was 90 degrees that day. I knew that was going to be hard. I knew I needed to, sometimes you have stomach issues. You can be prepared for that. But I didn't know that my left quad was going to lock up. But I was prepared for the unexpected. And then being versatile to reassess that goal. I think with maybe some of your type A personalities that are so driven and so focused and very goal oriented, and they make their plans, which is great, and they're high functioning. They can accomplish a lot, but a lot of times what prevents them from reaching their full potential is curveball or that unexpected, that ability to, kind of to think on the fly or to redirect in the moment.
Wow.
I'm a planner. A lot of times people think that I just fly by the seat of my pants and that I don't give a lot of thought. I am a planner. Sometimes I've been guilty of planning out every 30-minute segment of my day. I'll write it down. This is what I'm going to do at 8:30. This is what I'm going to do at 9 o'clock. I'm going to eat an apple at 3:03, and then. But I also think what I've learned to do is, okay, if something happens in the middle of the day that alters that plan, how can I be resilient enough to step back and reassess and then get back into the fight? So to me, that's a really important component because, again, I'm an individual of faith, and I always find it interesting how we were created to see the past, right? We can see the past. Even sometimes it can get a little murky. We may kind of recreate it, but we have a pretty good indication of being able to see the past. If we're cognizant, we can live in the present, but none of us can see into the future. I often wondered, like, why is that? Right? None of us have a crystal ball. But we spend so much time thinking about what tomorrow is going to be like, or what this business venture is going to be like, or how this is going to play out. And that's good because we feed off those past experiences. But we never can plan it out. There's nobody that none of us are capable of predicting exactly how tomorrow is going to play out. And so so you've got to be resilient enough to be able to make adjustments, as, different adversity affects you throughout life.
I love it, man. Managing the unexpected adversity. That's huge. That's huge. Awesome piece of advice. I learned a ton from this conversation, man, and I'll definitely be able to hold on to some of this stuff for a long time. And, I'm starting to pick up running myself a little bit more, simply to challenge myself mentally. So this conversation was definitely very, very helpful for me. And I think it will be helpful in a lot of different respects for a lot of different people. So again, man, super appreciate you taking the time to come out here and chat with me. This was a lot of fun for me.
Sure. Yeah, I'll make a deal with you, Matt. I can help you be a better runner if you can help me with some hip flexibility. So
that's a solid deal.
We can have a barter system there. We can.
Yeah, we'll have to get in touch and chat about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Again, man, thank you so much for your time. All the best to you and your family.
Same to you. Same to you.
Where can people connect with you?
Okay. Well, our nonprofit runforwater.net is, there's an email there. And then of course on Facebook, Greg Armstrong, you can connect with me there. But if you want to know more about our nonprofit, we have runforwater.net. And we also have a kind of a side organization that's a spinoff of that is 84days.net, where we go into different places around the world trying to empower women. There's a lot of girls in developing countries that don't have proper feminine hygiene products. And my daughter kind of leads that along with some other girls, that organization. And we try to provide reusable feminine hygiene products for girls in the world so they can stay in school and they can be empowered. So if you're interested in any of those organizations, you can find me through both of those.
So runforwater.net and 84days.
.net, that's right.
.net.
84 days, that's the number of days that a girl would miss from school if she doesn't have proper feminine hygiene.
Wow, incredible. Again, man, thank you so much. Have an amazing day.
Same to you, Matt.